Why are tariffs such a big deal? Let me give you a sense of this. And what we're going to do is we're going to follow a component as it's manufactured. Actually, it's a component that goes into a car, but it's a component of a component because it's a piston that goes inside an engine in a car that's made in North America. And right now, here's the journey it takes. It starts off here in Michigan. So in Michigan is where the raw aluminium that's going to become part of that piston is then shipped across the border, that's key here, across the border into Ontario. So in Ontario, it's cast into a piston, and then it goes back to Michigan again, OK? And at that point, when it's in Michigan, it needs to go down to Mexico because it needs to be finished, and it's finished in a factory in Mexico. So it goes all the way down there, across the border, into Mexico. But the journey's not over yet because at that point, it needs to go back across into Wisconsin and then Michigan, where it's assembled. It's assembled into an engine, and at that point, from Michigan, it goes again across the border into Ontario, and that is where it basically becomes part of a car. So it's assembled into the car, and the car at that point is basically a finished product, and that's shipped over to the US. It's one example. Deep breath here. But if you've kind of totted this up, you might have come to the conclusion that, look, we're talking about 6 border crossings of that component, and right now, those border crossings in and out of the US are tariff-free, OK? And this is a free trade zone. If you're imposing tariffs on all of those border crossings, that will tot up. It will be a very big deal indeed because it raises the cost. And that is a really big deal when it comes in particular to automotives. These bars are basically just showing you how much of each different category of import into the US is coming from Mexico, from Canada, from China, of course, which are the affected countries here. And with automotives, you're talking about over 50%. Over 50% of all the vehicle imports, but also the components as well, come from these places. A lot of it from Mexico. You can see the green there. Look at energy. Over 60, it was actually around 60% is from these areas, imports, most of that from Canada. And overall, you're talking about 40% of all imports. So it's an enormous, enormous amount of imports. Imagine Brexit in the UK. So it's similar. You've got a free trade zone. We never actually impose tariffs. Tariffs here on any of these goods are going to push up prices. And of course, the extent to which they get pushed up depends on precisely how long these tariffs are in place for and how severe they are. This is showing you historically, so going back to the 1800s, just how high the average tariff rate was in the US. The famous example here, the 1930 Smoot-Hawley famous set of tariffs. Some say they contributed to the Great Depression. That was really high. What we're talking about here, it's not quite as high as that, but certainly the highest since the 1940s. So really historic levels. And the upshot of all of that is, as well as it meaning higher inflation, because the cost of goods potentially go up, it means less activity. And this is a kind of measure of just how much activity there is in the economy in recent years. And the higher this line is, the more activity there is. Look at this. Just recently, in the last few days, the expectation is that the US economy is shrinking by 2.8% in the first quarter. A lot of people will look at that and say, listen, this is part of the implication of tariffs, but also broader concern about US economic policy.